Hello, Gabriel back. We are in the process of going through step 4, discussing the survey results, the fourth of the 5 steps to a successful Moti journey. And the first mini step in step 4 is about structuring the narrative. Why are we structuring a narrative? For a number of reasons. The first reason is we want to organize a conversation that is meaningful for everybody. And people naturally are inclined to talk about themselves. They are inclined also to tell stories about themselves. And what we want to do here is create a space so that we can weave our personal stories into a team narrative so that we can share the same meaning about what we want, about what we feel, about what the issues are, and how we can come to a solution. So we're structuring a narrative because we like to tell ourselves stories and we like to tell each other stories. And so by structuring the team meeting around a narrative, we are creating the space for storytelling. And a good story has a beginning and has an end. So our story will have a beginning and an end. And there should be also some suspense, some interest, some appetite for discovery. And so this means that we will be talking about cause and effect, or about looking at effects and trying to understand together what the causes are. So working backwards, a little like solving a mystery. You start by observing the scene of the crime, and then you work backwards into telling the story of what actually happened that led to that crime. So here we're not talking about anything as dramatic as a murder, but what we are doing is reminding ourselves that we have something in common, and that thing that we have in common are our basic needs of autonomy, belongingness, and competence. And so self-determination theory will provide the narrative for us. So right now what we're doing is we're preparing for the team discussion. We are sort of rehearsing it into our mind. We will take an example and see how we can prepare that conversation with that example. But first, self-determination theory. And this is a reminder, because by now you've internalized self-determination theory. Remember from a previous video that the Moti app automatically generates a team report. And this team report starts with the motivational outcomes. So our emotional well-being and our level of engagement. These motivational outcomes are themselves caused by the satisfaction or the frustration of our 3 basic psychological needs. These, in turn, are largely due to the leadership skills of our supervisor, but also of the general corporate system that is in place in our national society, in our organization. So any conversation, any meeting should start with the question, how are we feeling now? We want to check in. We want to make sure that when the conversation starts, we're all in the right place. We're not stressed out. We're not overly worried about what might happen. We are excited about this collective discovery and about the prospects of addressing some of the problems that we have reflected upon before the meeting. We want to know how we're feeling now, also to help the facilitator of the session isolate or rather identify, some of the tensions or some of the people that might be a little more fragile, and so that they can take care of them. Now, the narrative starts with how do we feel? How do we really feel? And how did we feel when we took the survey? So ideally, you want this conversation to happen a few days or maybe a couple of weeks after people have responded to the survey. But even a week is enough for people to feel differently. And so the conversation is about how do we feel now as we start this conversation, and how did we feel when we responded to the survey questions, and what happened in between. So already we want to set a dynamic. Emotional well-being is not static. There might be patterns, there might be recurrences, things might happen more frequently, but nothing is set in stone. Quite the contrary, we want to do something about how we feel. Now, already here, you can see that we have a team of volunteers that is doing relatively okay, but that there are some individuals who feel frequently emotionally drained from their volunteering activity, and some that sometimes feel emotionally drained. So here you see that there is already some emotional distress that happens, and it might happen during the conversation. So let's be careful about especially these individuals here who might be fragile. How about our level of engagement? So if we're reasonably energetic, it's likely that we're also engaged. And here we have a team that's highly engaged, really, except perhaps for a couple of individuals here. But the majority, will want to continue volunteering. The majority say that their team has a great deal of personal meaning for them. They're considering everything satisfied with their volunteering activity. And maybe here there's something about values. So the things that I value in life are very similar to the things that the team values. So there seems to be a consensus here, but not everybody fully agreed with the statement. In fact, about half somewhat agree with the statement. But no warning signs just yet. Now, if you want, you can look at the dashboard of the same team, and you'll see that indeed this team here in red does much better than the benchmark. So we have a good functional volunteering team. Now, why are they functional? Well, because their needs are being met. But if you look closely at this triangle, you'll see that the need for competence is met, highly met. We're at 4.4 in autonomy, so there might be some room for improvement, but overall that's pretty good. And the sense of belongingness is maybe slightly lower. Now let's look at the distribution of answers for autonomy. Most volunteers here feel autonomy, but we do have one or two individuals here who could do, perhaps, according to what they've answered to the survey, with a little more autonomy. So we might have an outlier here. So if that person is part of the meeting, we want to really look at possible tensions about micromanagement or somebody feeling that they cannot be themselves, and that might be problematic even during the meeting. But we have a good team here in terms of autonomy. Now let's see, for belongingness, we've noticed that belongingness is not as high as competence and autonomy, and indeed, we do have some, well, the majority, agree, but there might be some room of improvement. Maybe some people feel maybe a little left out of the team. Maybe these are people who arrived, or we'll see during the conversation. You might figure that out. And then in terms of competence, well, these volunteers feel competent, so that probably fills their self-esteem. They're probably satisfied because they feel competent. It's very satisfactory to feel that you're doing a good job. How about leadership skills? Overall, pretty good. Still, you see, these might be the same slightly disgruntled volunteers, maybe just two individuals. They do not feel that they're actually heard or understood, or maybe not encouraged to ask questions. It looks like it's more about these two individuals than it is about the team. But something might be, maybe something can be done for them. Now, we call management the extrinsic motivators, so the returns, rewards, and status that are provided by the volunteering activity. Here we have an example of high status. People are actually proud of working for this national society, but they seem relatively frustrated by the level of rewards. So let's have a look at the distribution of answers. And here we have all 6 questions that relate to management. Here, indeed, we see that some people might feel that their efforts are not being recognized or rewarded. So, this concludes this first narrative. What I hope is that you have a sense of how you can use the team reports to structure the conversation by starting with what we would naturally start with, how are we feeling, and ending with things that are less personal, which is basically the organization itself, its processes, its corporate culture. So we go from what's personal to what's less personal, but we hope that we take our personal experience at every single step of the conversation, so that way we can inform the team and reflect ourselves on what we can do about all this. This concludes the explanation on how to structure a narrative around the Moti survey results. The next step will be facilitating that conversation. I just want to say one last thing before we part. Is we gave you one technique of structuring a narrative. There might be situations where there's a very pressing issue that is plaguing the team, in which case you might want to build a narrative directly around that and not waste too much time. Another way of creating a narrative is to go for the strengths and weaknesses. So if you're more comfortable with other approaches, be my guest. I just want to stress that the approach that we presented using self-determination theory has been tested and has proven to be quite successful. See you soon.